Welcome to Unfixed. This podcast explores the intersection of artificial intelligence and the institution of higher education. I am Zach Justice, Professor of Communication Studies and Director of Faculty Development.
I am Nick Janos, Professor of Sociology.
We are employees of Chico State and we will discuss some of our work, but this podcast is not affiliated with Chico State and the views expressed here are not representative of the university. Unfixed is just part of our portfolio. Check out our writing at meltsintoair.org and subscribe to our twice-a-month newsletter where we run down the top AI news stories and connect them to higher education. Nick, I didn't expect to be recording today. What's the special occasion?
Well, it's breaking news, Zach. The CSU, the California State University System, has apparently signed or re-signed a deal with OpenAI to provide ChatGPT access to all students, faculty, and staff.
That is big news. I'm glad we're recording. Nick, why don't you give the listeners a quick overview if they're coming to this and don't know a lot?
Okay. So early 2025, the California State University System signed a large no-bid contract with OpenAI to provide ChatGPT Edu access across all 23 campuses, framing it as an equity and workforce readiness move. But the rollout quickly became controversial because faculty, students, and unions argued that the system moved too fast, spent millions during a budget crisis, and made a major educational decision without enough consultation. Now, in May of 2026, the CSU has renewed the contract, reportedly committing another $13 million per year for 3 years, which makes the stakes higher. This is no longer just a pilot or one-year experiment, but a deeper institutional commitment. The debate became about governance, labor, academic freedom, student learning, privacy, corporate influence, and whether access to AI should be treated like basic educational infrastructure or a permanent bet on one private company.
Dun, dun, dun.
Ooh.
No, the drama is high, the stakes are high. We got a lot to talk about. Let's do some initial reactions. One of the things, Nick, we talked about, and we'll call back to the EdTech episode quite a bit in this episode, but one of the things that seems possible here is we might be seeing some vendor lock-in, right? Because we had ChatGPT for a year plus, now we're going to have for 3 more. That's a lot of sort of infrastructure build out around one company. So do you think we're locked in?
Yeah, it kind of seems like we're moving that way. It is a 3-year deal. And in the announcement, which just for the listener, Zach and I, we read our emails, and not everybody does, wink, wink. But there was a strange email that came in. So just real quick story here. A strange email came in about a week or two ago from somebody in the CSU. I actually didn't know who it was. It didn't have anything on AI in the subject line. And about like a few paragraphs in, it basically declared that the system was renewing the contract with OpenAI. And I instantly was like, oh my God, this is the announcement. It's the non-announcement announcement. So I emailed you. But in that announcement, that little section there was a little part about exploring multi-vendor agreements in the future.
That's a good point. Yeah, it does sound like that is a possibility in the future, is that we might also get some access to other models through other vendors, which I'm excited about. And right now, while we're recording this, I'm running the AI Retrofit, our sort of flagship AI education program for the campus. And we explore things from other vendors, Notebook LM, Adobe tools, stuff like that. And I would love to have a little bit more of an institutional agreement and arrangement with some of those things because a lot of them are useful in a different way that ChatGPT is. So I would love to have a little bit more option. I know sometimes that means more money, but I'm not writing the checks.
Yeah. Well, and also, I'm going to go on record again and saying when we had Leslie Kennedy and Emily Magruder from the Chancellor's Office on our podcast in the fall of 2025 about the signing of the original agreement, and we actually got some great insight into there where it originated in the governor's office. But late in that conversation, in that episode, I did pose to them about lock-in, because there's another way to think about lock-in is if we do like a ping pong ball of vendors constantly changing. Like let's say they didn't sign with OpenAI, they went with Anthropic for 2 years, and then they ditched that for Google. one thing that anybody who works in higher ed and they're working with ed tech, whenever there's a major ed tech switch, there is pain points.
Yes.
There's drawbacks. And we were only 18 months in, so I was on the record asking them or telling them, hey, you should be mindful that for those of us who are using the tools, whether they student, faculty, or staff, and spoiler alert, the survey came out about a month ago, shows that high usage of these tools. If there's that many people using it and you're going to switch to a different vendor, the downside there is then everybody loses their workflows and things like that.
And that is one thing that these companies have not really ironed out the kinks with. And it's because they want loyal users. But
Hmm.
like changing from ChatGPT to Claude or another system, it's a little bit more complicated than you would think that it would be. And Claude tried to streamline, Anthropic tried to streamline some of that with a user prompt that would export some history and allow you to switch over. But yeah, the switching cost is really high on this. Nick, I know we have this later down, but I want to start this conversation now. Do you think if OpenAI is still a startup?
I don't think so at this point. They have so many large co-investors. I know they're going to do an IPO at some point. I know that they want to operate as a startup, but I feel like they've moved out of the startup into a public corporation, and they're operating at a bigger scale, I think, than those sort of move fast and break things startups that we saw so much of in the last 20-25 years.
I would tend to agree. My marker for this might be a little bit different than yours, and the push for them into enterprise, which seems very intentional at the corporate level, that seems less startup and more we are now a sort of institutional technology player. Part of me thinks that they still want like the forgiveness and cute factor of
Totally.
being a startup.
Yes.
But when you're signing multi-year agreements with the largest university system in the country and trying to get a foot in the door with every other major tech corporation and taking billions of dollars from sovereign wealth funds,
Yeah. And the federal government, the contracts there with the
great
DoD.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So they want to have both, right? They want
Yeah.
to pretend like they're a startup. But as you've said, whether on the podcast or in private, I think you've made this great point, though. They are still startup adjacent, meaning that they are not an institutional legacy corporation like Apple, Microsoft, Google, something that's been around for 20 to 40 years. And that comes with risks because
It does.
we've speculated like there is scenarios in which OpenAI is no longer in business before this contract is even expires.
Right. Yeah, it's a line that I've used before. 5 years from now, OpenAI could be the most valuable company in the world or not exist. Both those futures are very possible. And
Yeah,
I'm not like an investor person or a business predictor person, but even the smartest people that I've listened to about that, a young company without those sort of existing understandings about how to interact with other large corporations, anything can happen. And I mean, some of these, I understand that Anthropic takes their accounting, let's just say it's a creative, but I mean, they look like they're profitable for the first time. OpenAI, I think, is targeting like 2029 or 2030.
mm,
Boy, that's a long way
it's a
off.
long way off. Yeah, I mean, and that's a risk. I mean, for critics of the deal, I don't know if this is really their criticism, but it could be that you're signing a deal with a company that is on uncertain economic future.
Unprecedented too,
Yeah,
right?
unprecedented as well.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So that's a risk in terms of also getting back to the lock-in question. Like, sure, we signed the deal, but if there's turbulence or turmoil within the company in the next 3 years, that could be a system that looks like they signed a deal with a great product is now struggling with all these people who've been using it who no longer have access, or who knows what could happen, right?
right.
Versus they could have gone with Google or Gemini, which Google is a company that's been around for now 26 years.
Yeah. Yeah, there were definitely other options on the table. We'll kind of get to how much those were or were not explored, which we have incomplete information about, just to
Yeah.
be perfectly honest. But I do want to talk about the money. So this
Hmm.
is $13 million a year for 3 years. which sounds like a lot until you realize that that's about the cost of three sociology faculty members per year. Is that right, Nick? I mean, I've seen your pay stub, right?
Oh yeah, yes, definitely. We're sucking up all
Yeah.
the money here.
Yeah, yeah. You're basically a first round NFL draft
It's
pick.
that
That's what I
online
understand your
education
salary to
program.
be. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but you did some calculations here about the money to put these sort of things into perspective. Do you want to share any of those?
Yeah, I think large numbers, I'm guilty of this. A lot of people, when we see large numbers, they are intimidating. 17 million, 13 million, these seem like huge sums of money, and they are. They're to me like they're huge. I would never see that much money in my life. But for a company like OpenAI and a system like the CSU, who are dealing in hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, um, $13 million per year, I wanted to kind of like, yeah, what does that look like in context? So the staggering amount of students that CSU has, I think, is the first place to start. This agreement gives access to 470,000 students. That's huge. That's a lot of students. So if you just take 13 million per year and you divide it by that number, 470,000 students, that's like giving everybody a voucher of $27 to get dinner one time per year for every student, right? It's, or if you want to think about it per day, you're spending 7 cents per day on each student to have access to the world-class model. I mean, maybe in that regard, that doesn't sound like a huge investment. Um,
Yeah, you're right. The 13 million jumps off the page, and in several reported news articles, one from NPR, a couple from EdSource that we'll link in the show notes, 13 million jumps off the page. That is a big sounding number. The thing that's kind of lost sometimes, though, is what you're pointing out here, is that the scale of the CSU means that, like, per user, those numbers are much smaller in a way that I think is difficult for people, even at other educational institutions, to understand.
Yeah. And I think it makes, if you were to think about like if there's students who need food or and the kind of real struggles our students face around housing and around food, you can't do a lot with 13 million when
No.
you're trying to serve 470,000 of them, right? The money
Yeah.
doesn't go very far.
Yeah.
If you were just thinking about in just indirect payments. So I understand the mismatch when the original deal was made in terms of the budget crisis, as an optics problem, perhaps. I think it's really a good conversation. Like, how should we spend our money? Is this not something? I don't know the numbers, Zach. Do you know the numbers, how much we spend on other technology in the system?
So this is, I think I think NPR reported the biggest ed tech contract that we have signed, but it's one of the other points of comparison that's sort of lost in this is that we do lots of contract stuff as a system
Hmm.
around technology, around infrastructure, around energy, around building construction. And because of the size of the system, those things are huge. But because this thing is new, it is oftentimes trotted out. There's a big number attached to it, and there's no real point of comparison.
Yeah.
Nick, you and I we were on the record. I mean, we have an article in EdSource about this exact topic about why institutional relationships for higher ed and AI are important. And we didn't get into the weeds on, okay, well, what else could you spend $13 million on? But yeah, when you're trying to affect change for 460,000 people, it's not a lot that you can do with that amount of money.
Yeah.
Are we ready to move on to what this means for kind of our wheelhouse in teaching and learning?
Yeah.
So one of the things, and this is the flip side of the vendor lock-in, we do have some stability here.
Hmm.
You and I have both been building things for the last year and a half, not knowing if the custom GPT that we made or the projects that we've been working on, if those things were going to evaporate. And we also knew other faculty members and students who didn't get into the EDU ecosystem because they were like, well, I have my own and I have no idea if this is going to go away in a year.
Hmm.
So this will bring some stability to the ecosystem, which definitely has benefits.
Yeah, for sure. That's not something to take lightly. I think stability in any aspect of people's life, whether it's personal or working or being a student, is very important. I just think about when I think about AI and I relate it to infrastructure. Electricity reliability is so critical for how businesses run, hospitals, schools, personal safety, how we, eat our dinner and whatnot with cold refrigeration. I think I'm not saying that AI is yet at that level, but stability in making plans and how you're doing your work, experimenting is good, and it's good to be flexible. And I think that's something that we argue in our piece in EdSource, that the CSU needs to be flexible. And perhaps some of this they didn't necessarily flex enough, which we'll get to in a bit. But offering stability, not just for the tools, but also for the conversation, because now it allows faculty and students and staff to continue to develop the norms about appropriate and inappropriate AI use, norms around what is, something that you're going to create on your own, something that you can create with a tool like generative AI, about academic honesty. I firmly believe, and we talked about this with Inara Scott, that by pushing it underground, by canceling a contract, making everybody sort of use these tools as underground contraband is not going to help universities find their footing in this age. It's not going to help students figure out how to act in this world. It's not going to help us develop the critical thinking necessary to help our students and ourselves move forward.
Nick, if this were a prohibition era, we didn't have a contract and we were prohibiting, could you and I have gotten Al Capone rich by smuggling contraband AI into the
Yeah.
university?
Yeah, that seems like a premise of maybe some interesting sci-fi movie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I like that. I like that. Okay. So, one of the things, and you mentioned this in your introduction, there was real pushback to the contract on a couple of different fronts. And one of the most visible things in the last 6 months was there was a widely circulated petition with, I think, several thousand signatures demanding that the CSU not renew, but actually cancel the ChatGPT Edu account. But there was other pushback too from CFA, the California Faculty Association, from other outlets. Um, Not only did that not seem to matter, but none of those things were even mentioned in any of the official
Mhm.
announcements. I think they had a little bit of mention in some of the news articles, but that pushback did not seem to factor into any of this in any meaningful way that at least we're aware of.
Yeah, it's certainly not at the narrative level of what's been reported and what the statements from the CSU contain. So, in terms of like the battle of the story, I feel like those pushback and petition and all that stuff hasn't changed the message coming from the CSU at all.
Yeah, the one thing that you and I talked about when this came out is that when the initial contract was signed, there was a lot of fanfare. I think we got a video from the chancellor.
Hmm.
We had a immersion day on our campus. There were rollout days on other campuses. There was a lot of buzz about the contract. And this one, like you said, it was kind of buried in a story that, you and I and not very many other people read. And so it is possible that, this story was let more underplayed because they were more conscientious of the
Hmm.
optics of the first time, but that's a lot of speculation.
Yeah.
What we do know is that it does not seem like the pushback factored into the ultimate decision that was made, even if maybe it did impact how some of the messaging happened afterwards.
Yeah. And here I do want to, for anyone listening at the CSU level, I think that how they have messaged this and the deal, the re-signing of the deal, and how to communicate it to faculty and students. I think that there's like hopefully they're learning some lessons about how missteps maybe that were made, or at least areas that were like unexplored in the initial rollout going forward. I'm not sure that how they announced this indicates that they're going to do that, but I could definitely see that like more like in the survey data, like not many students are using the version that we're providing, that the CSU is providing them. Like, how do we bump that number up? Because I
Yeah.
think you and I and others, we had James Freese from San Diego on, and he was talking about the privacy and data security benefits that you get from using the CSU's EDU model. Like, how to communicate that? I just like would see better and more communication, and also listening and this is in our EdSource piece from May, is that, a little bit more dialogue, more talking to the people who have these concerns, because you and I in that piece, and we think this, that there are lots of concerns about
Yeah,
the deal,
legitimate concerns.
legitimate concerns about the deal and with AI in education. That's what we've
Yes.
been writing and talking about for years now. So that stuff's real. But at the end, on this issue about the pushback, we argued in this piece that came out a couple of weeks, just actually 2 days before the announcement it came out, that canceling and getting rid of the contract is not a solution to any of AI's challenges.
Right. Yeah. You can cancel the contract. AI still exists, right? It's
Yes.
just, we're just doing the thing, like you said, what forces it underground.
Yes.
And we do want to get to the missed opportunities, but I have a hot take here
Ooh,
that
hot take.
I want to share with the
We
listeners.
need some kind of sound.
Yeah, we do. Jamie, we need a hot take sound. So this is very in the weeds, but the major labs have started to shift their pricing models, especially for their coding agents like Codex and Claude Code, from a per user charge to a per token charge. So what that means is that if Nick is running Claude Code on his MacBook, previously he would be charged as Nick. He would pay a flat fee per month. And now we're moving towards a model where he's going to be charged based on the amount of AI he uses.
Mm,
And that is because, especially these coding agents, have been incredibly powerful and incredibly popular. And we have people that are running multiple agents 24 hours a day on a handful of machines and burning through billions of
hmm
tokens. So, you may have somebody that they're paid $200,000 as a software engineer and they're burning $500,000 in tokens,
hmm
and the boss is fine with that. So, but that extreme usage is pushing the labs to charge per token rather than per user because you have these handful of users who are using an enormous amount of tokens. We haven't seen the fine print details of this contract, but this appears to be a per user contract.
hmm
And so my hot take is that by year three of this contract, maybe even by year two, this could look like an unbelievable bargain,
Yeah.
especially if you're calculating this by token rather than by user. Because if we have legions of computer science faculty and students and other people that are writing code, that are setting up agents and building stuff, and we're locked into a per user model and everybody else is locked into a per token model,
Yeah.
we're way out ahead.
Yeah.
So that's my hot take.
That is, I hadn't thought of that, and it's super interesting. And I think that you are onto something there. It's something to really watch. It's alerting all of my energy, electricity, hot buttons in my head about like
Yeah,
the sort of flat fee versus per kilowatt hour ways how electricity moves from just pay us $50 and use whatever you want to we're going to bill you literally by the kilowatt hour everything you
right.
use. And if we're on a pay us a flat fee and the rest of companies, the rest of the economy starts moving to a per token billing system, this could look like a great deal for the CSU,
Yeah,
especially if the EDU model keeps pace with a lot of the advanced model development over the next 3 years.
yeah, and there may be, like I said, fine print in the contract about escalators and cost or caps on token usage. But from what we know right now, this is one of those things where, this contract on a sort of like per usage basis, it might look quite good a couple of years from now, even better than the financials pencil in right now. But Nick, you flagged a couple of things, and we've alluded to them earlier, some sort of missed opportunities. We talked about a couple in our EdSource piece, but why don't you get us started talking about some things that may have been missed in this negotiation?
Yeah, so earlier we talked about the scale of the CSU, the a country's largest public university system, 470,000 students, 68,000 faculty and staff. That is gigantic. It's a large system. So the biggest missed opportunity I see here is that with such a large system, we're basically a buyer of a commodity in a way, right? So we can flex. The CSU should theoretically have been able to flex more of its power as a buyer of the good to say to OpenAI, hey, we're going to sign a new deal because, and I also did the math. I don't think the 13 million to the 17 million, that's kind of like the cost is, it may even actually be per month more now, but that someone else can do that math. But basically with a large system like this, if you're not going to change the financial cost, what else could they have done in the writers, what in the contract? Could they have used the buying power to negotiate a better product, such as changes to the EDU model to make it more in line with what higher education needs and wants, both faculty, staff, and students, right? Could we have been inserted into a creation of a feature request pipeline where there are more open channels that the CSU collecting information and data from its faculty, staff, and students that could then directly influence how ChatGPT Edu is deployed and developed and the parameters around that. So I kind of think that that's a missed opportunity. Now, I haven't seen the contract. I don't know if any of this exists or doesn't exist, but it was not talked about. I will assume it doesn't exist, but I think this is, to me, the biggest missed opportunity is to use the power of the CSU's buying power to negotiate changes into some aspect of that relationship or product itself.
Yeah, Nick, I thought this was an astute observation, and I think that you sort of alluded to it right there, but let's say some of this was negotiated in which case, great. But also, then why aren't we featuring that when we
Yeah,
are announcing this to the public? Because
exactly.
something like that, where then faculty voice becomes a feature of the relationship between OpenAI and educational institutions, that would go so far in assuaging the
Totally.
fears of, some of the most vocal critics. One of the things they talk about is that ChatGPT Edu isn't an educational software product. It is basically a thin wrapper on an existing commercial product. And that's largely true.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't have to be true, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you put some people that are in the classroom in direct communication with the labs or on a board that serves an advisory capacity, or like you said, in a feature request pipeline, some of that stuff can start to change.
Yeah.
And I, one of two things is true. I either wish that we had done that and negotiated it, like you said, or if we did do it, why on earth are we not featuring that first and foremost when we are announcing this to the broader public?
Absolutely. It's the same thing we do with in Structure, the company that owns Canvas. I mean, the system, the schools get to basically help develop the software platform
Right.
of our learning management systems. And that would be such a great feature. The cynical part of me is like, if that was in the contract, then they would have announced that.
Yeah. 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 So definitely some missed opportunities there. And also, I mean, you could say that we did some consultation and that we did the big
Mm,
survey, but in terms of direct consultation with the contract, that was another big critique coming in. And if there were opportunities to do that, I was not aware of them. And you and I are pretty plugged into this space. So I know there's a generative AI advisory committee at the chancellor's office, but that's also the same committee that made some calls about this before that then have received some criticism. So
hmm
it does seem like there were some opportunities to get broader buy-in that weren't taken advantage of.
Yeah.
But overall, big news. So definitely some positives, definitely some missed opportunities, and I will say I was more relieved than I thought I would be to think, okay, the next 3 years, we know what's going to happen with this technology in this space, that we're going to have a relationship, that this is kind of locked in. I didn't realize that that stability was something that I was craving as much as I was.
hmm Yeah. Me too. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. You can find our writing on meltsintoair.org and on LinkedIn, Zach Justice and Nick Janos. Find these links and more in the show notes. If you have feedback or want to share an idea, email us at unfixed@meltsintoair.org. Thank you to Jamie Gunderson for producing and editing the show.